welcome back to A Better World. This is your host, Mitchell J. Rabin, and I'm very glad you're joining us again today. Today we're going to have another very interesting show. We have with us in studio the author of this book, Do You Quantum Think? New Thinking That Will Rock Your World, Dianne Collins. Dianne has been an executive consultant to the Fortune 50 companies of our country and has met with visionary leaders of all sorts in business as well as in government. And she has helped to guide and helped to even design different programs to help advance the thinking and the understanding and overview of where we're going, in a sense, as a planet, and then broken down into government or business. And there is obviously a tremendous confluence between each of these sectors of our society. So Dianne, it is fair to say, is a holistic thinker. And those of you who watch the show with any regularity know that that's what goes on here at A Better World. This is really one of my favorite subjects. And Dianne has synthesized a tremendous amount of material. Well, I can tell you, it sounds like a sister. It sounds like an alter ego of mine, quite honestly. It's kind of funny. But the voice, the tone, the humor even, is so in common. As I've been reading this book, I should be telling you this, as I've been reading
Yes,
your book,
should be.
Dianne, and you, it's really like old home week for me. It really is. It just has a beautiful resonance. It's
Thank
like,
you.
oh yes, and
Good.
even the people that we seek to quote are in common, and the quotes themselves. So
Right.
I'm very much in alignment with your thinking and what you're offering the world. So from the outset, I just want to say thank you for the good work you did to put this together.
Thank you. Thank you.
Absolutely.
And my intent, of course, is that everyone who reads it feels that same synergy.
Yes, yes, yes. Well,
And,
for
yeah.
those people who might not, perhaps you could give us a good description of what is quantum thinking?
What is quantum thinking? Well, you know, I call the
In
Einstein...
one paragraph.
In one paragraph or less. Well, everyone knows we have to think in a new way today, right? We know we're in a transitional time. We know that our systems and structures are breaking down for the good so that we can
Well,
go...
we think that. The people that are embedded in them might not agree with that, but
Well,
I
with
agree.
quantum thinking, we do it immediately, right now. We're not working our way up to it.
Yeah.
So when we look at what's going on in the world, and everyone knows whether you're a quantum thinker or not, and everyone is a quantum thinker lying dormant, perhaps.
Yes, embryonic.
And yes, embryonic. And the point is to really, it goes to what Einstein said, which I say is a modern day mantra. The problems we have cannot be solved with the same level of thinking that created them. So even, whether you just use common sense and realize that our habits of thinking shape our experience, our results, our institutions, the way we go about and approach any situation, any problem, whether you just know that from a common sense point of view, whether you know that because you've studied the spiritual wisdom of the great masters who have taught that it is a consciousness-based reality that we're living in, that everything begins in thought, in consciousness, whether you have learned it from the quantum physicists who are discovering that today, who, as you know, Mitchell, have been verifying it for nearly 100 years now, many different verifications of the effect of mind on matter. So when I look at it and I think, well, I started to investigate this. As you think, so you become. And I thought, well, if all you had to do...
As a man thinketh,
Yeah,
as they say.
exactly. If you just had to change your thinking, to change the world, to change my business, to change my life, well then, why does it still look the way it does?
Why such the mishigas?
Exactly.
That's what we say in Chinese.
That's exactly.
Right? My old teacher of neurolinguistic programming, Richard Bandler, was
I met Richard once.
brilliant, brilliant man and a comedian to boot. And one of his books, as you know, then, is called Using Your Brain for a Change.
Right, right.
No, and I
Using
always,
your
that's
brain
just
for a
his
change.
humor that gets you to start thinking anew. He said it's sort of like your brain is sort of on reserve all the time, just doing the things it does automatically. Why don't you actually use it? You know, like with a goal and
Right.
set it up
With
so
an
that
awakened
you,
thinking.
with an awakened thinking, and set out a goal and start to use your brain consciously and actively to fulfill the goal. Otherwise,
Okay.
it's just sort of like on reserve all the time, in potentia, just bouncing around the way it might bounce.
Yes, and he showed people how to open up the automatic brain neural pathways
Sure.
to go to something new. But what my discovery, my revelation, as I call it,
Yes.
is that if you look at the nature of reality, that everything is in a system. We're in a universe of whole systems
Yes.
interpenetrating one another. And that we don't realize it, but our thinking is also taking place
product
in
of.
a system.
Sure.
As a system shaped by the predominant prevailing worldview. And this is really the thesis of quantum think. Quantum think
Yes.
is a system of thinking that I invented. I call it 21 plus 1 principles. I have to tell you a quick story about that.
Okay.
That put it all together. That, you know, people know today they want to connect spiritually. They know a little bit about subtle energy healing, about subtle energy in general, about resonance, about this, about that, about quantum physics, quantum insights. So what I discovered is a way to put it all together so that you can literally leap systems, because our world is predominantly the society that you and I are living in. You know, maybe not obviously every society in the world, in the Amazon or whatever, but the one that we know of, the developed world society, is primarily under the influence of the industrial age way of thinking.
Newtonian physics,
Right,
essentially.
Newtonian physics.
Right.
So how do we make that leap? And we do have to make a leap, because you can even be thinking about all of these, what we could call new worldview principles, quantum principles. But if your own thinking is still very much habituated by the industrial age way,
Sure.
which is...
No, I get that. And I think, look, there's the brilliant book by Thomas Kuhn called The Structure of Scientific Revolutions.
Right.
You're familiar,
well,
obviously.
Because he made popular the idea of a paradigm shift.
Well, sure.
Yeah.
But what he also showed is that all of human history shows, and it goes beyond that if you really wanted to go there, but
Right.
let's just stick with human history.
Okay.
That there are periodic shifts, just like there are periodic ice ages. And I think that's probably an interesting analogy. There are times when Mother Nature, Mother Necessity, requires the shift. And there is a shift in consciousness to something new. You know, think of what life was like before the wheel, just to give an example. So you've got pre-wheel
Right.
and post-wheel consciousness,
Right.
if you want to think about it.
Yeah.
Then you have, you know, the
Absolutely.
Ptolemaic,
Change the
and then the
reality.
Galileo. You go from a geocentric to a heliocentric. That would have been a really interesting time to live. What? The Pope is wrong? Just the can imagine what that would have been like to go
Really?
from one to the other,
Well,
and
we're
to
in
be
that
living in
now.
those times. Well, we are, but I'm building up a little bit
Okay.
sequentially,
Yeah.
just to say, now we've gone from, to be kind of broad-based about it, because there are many minor secular changes in between.
Right.
The Newtonian, to a broad brushstroke, to the quantum. I mean, even Einstein didn't get the quantum.
No, he didn't.
And so
that's
I'm
why
curious about why you quote him a lot. And in a sense, he missed that boat. And you know that.
Well, he And here is the reason I think, I can't speak for Einstein, although I do think...
I think you might want to if you invented quantum think.
I think I invoke him a little bit.
Okay. I can't
I'm
say,
not kidding.
you may have invented that word quantum think,
Yeah.
but quantum thinking
Yeah.
is a new way of stating something that's been going on for a long, long time. In
That's
many
exactly
minds.
right. But
Okay.
this word, quantum, it didn't enter our language until about 1927.
Right, was it Max Planck?
Max Planck, when
Sure.
he discovered that energy
And
moves in packets.
As long
But
as we've
let's
gone
get
this
back to
far,
the system.
the quanta,
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
quantum and quanta are the absolute smallest form of measurement we've got.
Right.
So to make a quantum leap means to go...
That's right. However, that tiny, tiny leap is a completely different spin. It's a completely different
Yes.
perspective.
Yeah.
And
Can
it has
be,
a big
right.
result. And this is how it works. So what I discovered, actually, I was in a conversation with Dr. Fred Allen Wolf, who was a
Fred
good
was on
friend.
the show 15 years ago.
He was, and
Great
a
guy.
theoretical quantum physicist, aka Dr. Quantum in today's world, and
Right.
very cute.
Yeah.
Anyway, and he was explaining to me about how the discoveries of science they create new language. As you say, it was just a question of distinguishing what had already been known, maybe by a select, I call it, spiritual elite. But what I'm seeing now is that it's time for everybody to get rid of those either or, the people who were always enlightened, there always been a few. Well, that,
I mean, now
what
mainstream,
I
you're saying.
think
Is that...
the big important part of the leap, Mitchell, is it's that we are mainstream in this leap. And how do we bring it about? If thinking creates reality, what creates thinking? That's the
Right.
question I was in.
Right.
And I realized that as
You and Martin Heidegger.
Martin Heidegger
many
was one
others.
of my favorite philosophers, actually.
Voila.
There you go. There we are again. Right?
You want me to stay out of your mind, don't you?
Right, get out. No, you're welcome in there anytime. It's
nice in there, it's fun.
It isn't even my mind. It's all one, which
That's
is
how I
part
keep
of quantum
getting it.
thinking, right? And so
You didn't know that we were sharing a morphogenetic field, did you?
we are, and
course.
and this is part of quantum thinking, is that making that leap, it's not trading in industrial age for the quantum age. And we have to say what some of the differences are,
Yes.
which I think is important. But the idea is that it's an expansion in a worldview.
Yeah.
It would be like this. You think nothing of upgrading the operating system in your computer. But what about the mind? What about, and I don't mean the cognitive, the click, 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 just the cognitive. When I use the word mind, I'm talking about the individualized form of the all-expansive, all-pervasive consciousness that becomes
The
our
software.
own
The
mind.
software, if you
Yeah, and that we are
Customized.
we're customized. We are customized, that's true. But we're also an aspect of that infinity. And somehow, when you realize that the great paradigm shift from the Newtonian worldview to the quantum worldview, here's what I was going to say.
Yes, excuse me for interrupting.
Wait, just imagine that your thinking is shaped by the worldview. And much of the worldview that our thinking as a collective society and as individuals, regardless of how enlightened anyone thinks they are, is being shaped and conditioned by a worldview that has in large part been proven to be inaccurate according to latest science. So, for example...
Well, certainly incomplete.
Right. Well, for example, incomplete, limited. In one dimension, it looks like, in the physical dimension of our ordinary five senses, that objects are solid and fixed. And this is what the scientist said. In order to get something to happen, you would have to push or pull on it. So in Quantum Think and Do You Quantum Think, the book, what I'm doing is I'm not explaining the science. I'm saying, how can we proactively influence our own thinking based on the more accurate and up-to-date knowledge
yeah.
at the edge of science.
Yes.
So if objects are solid and fixed, how does that map onto thinking? Well, we interpret it without even realizing it, that circumstances are solid and fixed.
Yes.
We have to change them. We have to fix the problems. We have to fix that person sitting
Our
across.
entire approach to the whole idea of problem solving is a function of that kind of mindset.
Exactly. So now, how is the quantum thinking different? Well, we've discovered that we're not in a world of solid objects, though to our perceptual apparatus, you know, for continuity in the world, we do perceive it that way, and that's obviously an important aspect is the physical dimension. But that we're in this multidimensional world where it's not a matter-based, it's not that consciousness comes from the brain, it's that, and it's an exchange, but it's more or less the other way around. That's the great paradigm shift, going from a matter-based reality system, a world, to a mind-based. Well, this is the great news, because that means that you and I are 100% the connective point. We're the connecting point into the field, the invisible field of energy intelligence that we shape according to, and you know in quantum physics, it's called the observer effect. I call it observer-created reality. Now, this is entirely different, because if we are the ones holding, how is, you know, the quantum physicists say, reality is more like a possibility waiting to happen, right? So what manifests anything is what we put our mind on. We're the ones collapsing the wave. We're the ones, and I use the metaphor of the internet, right? The internet, the infinity of the mind of humankind. How do we know,
The
you know,
global brain.
what are you, exactly, what are we going to click on? That becomes the reality.
Sure.
So in our own consciousness, what we click on becomes the reality. Now, a lot of people know this. I know a lot of viewers and people who are listening to this know this. And so what's the difference? The difference is to begin to look from the expanded principles rather than at them from the old world view perspective that we're all by default within. And the reason being, because we have so many habits of thinking, habits of approaching, that we don't even realize until we become aware of what I call, and borrow from science, the term least action pathways. The way the energy goes, because it's been that route before. That creates the neural pathways. And when you're able...
Path of least resistance is another way of putting
It's
it.
the least creative, the less enlightened, you know, in terms of...
The road
I'm gonna use
most
the word.
traveled, if you will.
The road most traveled. And so most of our thoughts, when you really begin to live the wisdom, and this is really what this book is about.
The essence, yeah.
It's about living the wisdom. It's not about, and I say right in the beginning of the book, knowing all this is completely irrelevant. And I do mean to say entirely irrelevant. And if you don't believe me, read the news headlines every day. And you will
I do.
understand why it's irrelevant, because for over 6,000 years, we've had the wisdom, as you brought up, Mitchell, available to us. So what's going to make the difference is to begin practicing the art of distinguishing. Distinguishing when we're conditioned by the old world, limited, matter-based, either or,
I agree.
right?
Sure.
Predict and control. Look at what we have in politics today. And people want to know.
Well, what we see is that in virtually, I'm going to translate a little from quantum think into quantum think, which is just to say...
I'm interested to hear that.
that every aspect, every sector of society we look at with old glasses. we look at from the Newtonian point of view. I'm involved a lot also in super advanced green technologies that would change the face of the planet like overnight. The science is there,
Right.
quantum physics being one of them, and the technology is there. It's actually made manifest already, and it's sitting in the storage rooms waiting to be utilized. You know, a quick example is that of the way things go, because it runs by, unfortunately, money. The inventor of the refrigerator...
Well, that's where I want to catch you right there.
Okay.
That's one of those least action pathways.
Yeah,
You see,
definitely.
someone like-
and that's also a
that's what
deficit poverty mentality as well.
Well, I don't want to go. I don't want to go that far with you, but I do want to say that we do tend to say things like this. Unfortunately, it's run by money. Well, maybe not. It's not really unfortunate.
Oh,
you know,
please
by the
challenge.
way,
That's
the
okay.
fundamental
It's fun.
aspect
Yeah.
of the quantum reality is that there are no absolute realities because
Well, for
everything is
sure.
energy in flux, right?
Exactly.
And that we're always the one, I say it very simply, in an observer-created reality where the reality exists as the spiritual masters say it on the screen of our own consciousness.
Right.
There's no separation between the observed and the observer. So I say it very simply, in modern terms, what you bring is what you get.
Sure.
So if we even look at this,
And how you think is what you get.
it's not to criticize, and I'm
no,
saying
no,
there's
not at all.
nothing wrong with us.
They're all reality tunnels.
They're just
as Robert
reality.
Anton Wilson described in The Cosmic Trigger and other works. And Tim Leary and others. You know, we choose a reality to travel upon, and it's also neuroplastic.
Yes,
So at a
however,
moment,
we're not always choosing the realities.
Right.
And that
We're
is
subconsciously
exactly
programmed
my point.
also.
It's not even well, we may be subconscious. That's another show, but
Tell.
subconscious.
I want to hear it. I want to hear it.
I think it's a construct that is maybe not relevant anymore. But if we just look at the classical mechanical worldview is what the industrial mechanistic
Has taught us.
mechanistic, right?
Right.
That's
it
the
has
name of
programmed
it.
us.
So if you think, how did that map onto human thinking? Oh, in many ways, we're mechanical too. Maybe at that stage of evolution, Mitchell, we needed to analyze, categorize, make conclusions, get some certainty about life.
Oh, sure.
And that was called a rational science. But
There's
now,
a major functionality,
yeah,
obviously.
we're in a world now
Yeah.
that we have transcended that level of effectiveness. So I'm not saying there's anything wrong with it. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with us either. In fact, I'm saying
Oh, no, I don't
maybe
hear
there's
that at
nothing wrong
all.
with us. No, but when you start seeing, why can't this green technology, why can't these there are many, and I know that you know this on a personal direct basis because you're working with it, goes to the fact of, if there is no absolute way that anything is, what's shaping how people
The
are
thinking.
thinking? The context. So this
Sure.
overarching context
Yes.
where we're in this either-or world, where we've got the 1% and the 99%. I say that is not quantum thinking, because when you're quantum thinking, you're thinking from wholes. You're thinking from
Systems,
the whole
fields.
system. So you're saying,
Sure.
in this case, why don't companies want the green technology? Because it threatens the way that they presently are able to generate their revenues and profits
And control market
shareholder,
share.
right? So what if you
Same in the
were-
world of healing.
if you go, exactly, same in the world of healing or any of the other things where it seems, I call it like a takeoff on Charles Dickens' A Tale of Two Realities, where we want to go back to what you and I were saying in the beginning, to make this convergence. Because what would make it? Well, if we're thinking for the 99% who that's a good thing, you know, people voicing, and maybe there
Sure.
are inequities.
Sure.
Well, then we also have to think for the 1%. If we're thinking for green technologies, when we start thinking, and this is, I work in partnership with my husband in business, Alan Collins, and when we work in our consulting, this is the kind of thinking that we begin to co-create this type of
I
thinking with
understand.
these leaders, is that
Right.
how can we have it work for everyone? How can we make these transitions?
Democratization, if you will.
Well, how can we make a transition for these companies? We don't need the corporations to fail. We don't need to attack the wealthy. What we need to do is start to come together and think, how can we have it work and get these new
Oh, I
technologies?
understand, for everybody.
And have it
So
work.
everybody can
But you
be
see,
in the win-win scenario.
that's exactly
Oh,
it.
I get it.
However,
I get it.
we're not actually doing that. Not for the most part.
No.
Not.
Well, it's obvious. We just have to look at our
I'm going to catch
world.
myself in a least action pathway right here.
Yeah. Well,
I'm
it's
catching
one
myself.
Thing, but it's
We-
one thing to see what has happened. And by the way, even that's not fixed. And I hear that too. In other words, the past itself is mutable. That's
Exactly.
interesting.
It's an
So-
interesting concept in quantum science.
And as a result, of course, as a
Yeah.
result, needless to say, the present becomes the future, and the future is mutable. Now, this is one thing I would like you to mutate, if you can, with quantum thinking. How can you take the last 40 seconds that we have remaining and turn it into 400 seconds? I have an answer.
You have an answer?
Yeah. You're going to come be on my radio show.
Okay, I'll come be on your radio show. That's a good answer. But I think the idea is for people to start to at least hold the idea open that we can
Yes.
literally take that tiny little quantum leap
Yeah.
that has an
Infinite potential.
absolutely expansive, right, huge possibility when we leap systems, when we leap the whole thinking system, when we start to live in energy fields.
Exactly. Thank you. Your work is brilliant. I love it, and it's inspiring. And we'll deconstruct more on the radio show.
Good. Sounds
Thanks
great. Thank
so
you
much.
for having me, Mitchell.
Absolutely.
It's been a
really
pleasure.
a lot of fun. This is Mitchell J. Rabin for A Better World. I hope you've gotten inspired by that, as I have, to think way outside of the box and forget about a box altogether. This is Mitchell J. Rabin for A Better World. Thanks so much for joining us, and I look forward to seeing you all next week.